الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. From the subjects of the Quran, which are all major subjects, mashallah, is the Jannah and the Hellfire, the hereafter, and the two places where it's going to be forever. Some people will be in Jannah and some people will be in the Hellfire. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the people of Jannah and to protect us from and to seek refuge in Allah from the Hellfire. And you can look at the entire Quran and the Deen of Islam from that perspective with regards to the end of things. Because oftentimes, the Quran directs us to look into al-aqibah, or the end. And as mentioned before, if you think, as the ulama they say, if you think what is the most special characteristics of al-aql, or reason, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the human beings unique, because that's the difference between the human beings and the rest of the creation of Allah. Taklif, to be responsible and to be held accountable for one's actions, is by al-aql. If someone does not have aql, the reason is removed, that means he's majnoon, he's insane. That means he's not mukallaf, he's not responsible for his actions. But in aql, what is the most basic or the core characteristics of al-aql? أخص خصائص العقل, as they call it. The most special of the characteristics of al-aql is what? Is another fil awaqib, is to look at the consequences of things, to look at the end of things. This is what makes the aql, the reason. Not that the aql is a person is able to invent this and that. This is instinct in the human beings. This is not the reason. The issue of the reason is to be able to see the end of things. This is part of it, yes. And of course, it makes a difference between the human beings and animals, for example. But what's the core of it is to look at the end of things, which is basically the entire deen of Islam, is for the hearts to be attached to the hereafter. Very briefly, I know people, mashallah, tired and they want to sleep. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he had in the Ramadan, he has would give, even they wrote it down, which is lectures that he gave called Majalis Ramadan, or things of that nature. He talked in one of them as examples, which is very clearly stated from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, some of the characteristics of the people of Jannah. So just to share that with you without going every word and every single detail in it. But and this is because we listen to the Quran and we listen to the characteristics and the description of Jannah and the na'im and the delight in Jannah from as-surur wal-farah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the people of Jannah the ultimate joy that they receive. No one can ever comprehend the essence of it, from the happiness and the joy and the sa'ada, which is only mentioned in the Quran for the people of Jannah. وَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ سُعِدُوا. The only time that as-sa'ada is mentioned in the Quran is with regards to the people of Jannah when they enter Jannah. That means it's the everlasting joy. And this is what everybody should compete. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. The real competition is this. And as mentioned before also, that every single human being on the face of earth are of equal opportunity to be the best on the face of earth. It is not based on your physical abilities or how smart you are or these other things that people excel in this life when it comes to the arzaq. Rich, poor, strong, weak physically. This is limitations. People many times they don't have a say in it. But when it comes to enter Jannah, or to be the best person walking on the face of earth to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is everyone has equal opportunity at all times, even now. And we see, for example, if you imagine on the entire ummah in Ramadan, there are people that are doing acts of ibadah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees what's in the hearts and the sincerity and the devotion, and at all times. So this is now the person would see how much loss we have in this life when we undermine the power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us in our hearts and our actions. Even if someone asked about someone is not able to fast in the month of Ramadan, he's sick. Does the hadith apply for him? من صام رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا غفر له ما تقدم من ذنبه. Whoever fasts Ramadan believing in it and ihtisaban, seeking rewards from Allah, his previous sins will be forgiven. Does that apply to him? He's not fasting. The answer is, as the ulama they say, by the will of Allah, inshallah, his reward is given as exactly someone that is fasting. Why is that? Not because we think that way, not because we hope that way. It's because of the wahy. The Prophet ﷺ clearly stated, إذا مرض العبد أو سافر كتب له ما كان يعمل صحيحا مقيما. Amazing mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is if al-abd, if the human being, the slave of Allah, falls sick or travels, it will be recorded for him what he used to do when he was resident in his place and when he was healthy. So when a person is healthy and still alive, the person has to take advantage of this. And as also mentioned before in Surah At-Teen, as the believers, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونَ. They have reward that never ends. The reward for the believers never end. Part of the meaning of it, of course, in the hereafter never ends because the reward of the actions is an everlasting joy. But part of the never ending of it is when they're doing it, when they're having the means. Once, if they don't have the means, the reward keeps on coming to them. And that's by the mercy of Allah. Even if someone reach old in age and he loses his mind. Before that, he was having acts of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's still alive. That means the rewards and the actions are continuous for him. So people don't have to necessarily feel bad for someone like this. This is all by the hikmah and the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we reflect upon the ayat of the Quran, and two places in the Quran, even though it requires lots of time for us to reflect, but to get to know some of the list the characteristics, and then our job and the tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to attain this is the ayat in Surah Ali Imran, وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And سَارِعُوا, that means go as fast as you can. And musara'a is to be in haste and to do the best you can to the forgiveness from your Lord and to the Jannah that it's with, is like the heavens and the earth, is prepared for the muttaqeen. Who are the muttaqeen? الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. Then it's the list. Very briefly, الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء. Those who spend at times of ease and at times of difficulties. النفقة الواجبة and النفقة المستحبة. The obligatory charity spending, whether it's zakah, whether it's spending on the dependencies, or the optional acts of charity, they fulfill that, and this is how they also get to learn that from the deen of Allah. And they overpowered their own greed. And again, yani subhanAllah, when you think about the deen of Islam, this greatest ni'mah that a person can have in this life, think of other ways of life. If someone wants to be righteous, how can they be righteous? And that's why the dalal al-mubin, deviation. Everybody think that they're going to receive goodness from Allah and they're saved from the hellfire or the punishment of Allah. Based on what? Based on their feelings. So now this is all corruption on the face of earth. You would find the worst tyrant on the face of earth. He would say that Allah loves him. Where did you get that from? Do you have a book that you follow that says this is how the wahy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you? We have the deen of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ is preserved with every single detail. If a person wants to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with him or not, here are the characteristics. If a person applies it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best what's in the hearts, then the rewards and the punishments are accordingly. Not that it's left for the people. And then you see how amazing and strange is when a Muslim, when he has these treasures, the Quran and the Sunnah, and they innovate in the deen. Why do they have to innovate in the deen? Why do they have to invent acts of worship or dhikr or ibadah or even beliefs when the matter has been completed? So al-infaq. So to learn this is a duty upon us. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ. Those who suppress their anger. So they suppress their anger so that فَلَا يَعْتَدُونَ. They don't transgress. And when people they transgress, when they get angry. Anger is a healthy thing if it's used in the proper way. But they don't transgress the limits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for them. And as a result of that, they don't have envy towards others because they made them angry, for example. So they suppress their anger, and that also requires ilm, requires knowledge. The next is وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and those who pardon and forgive others. So they don't revenge for their own selves, while they have the ability to do it. Not because they don't have the ability. Everybody's would forgive them. They have to. They don't have a choice. But كانوا the سلف الصالح كان الواحد منهم يعفو عند المقدرة. When he has the means to revenge, but he choose to pardon. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from the believers because it brings goodness. If it brings goodness, and again, especially for those who are close ones, والله يحب المحسنين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love the good doers. And فمن عفا وأصلح فأجره على الله. والذين إذا فعلوا فاحشة أو ظلموا أنفسهم ذكروا الله فاستغفروا لذنوبهم. In details, those who do fahisha, sins, explicit sins, all sins, أو ظلموا أنفسهم, or they wronged themselves. And the person wronged themselves when they commit sins, disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What happens to them? The believers, the people of Jannah, ذكروا الله. They would remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فاستغفروا لذنوبهم. They remember the greatness of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's so many different things to remember at that moment. When a person remembers the sin, many things to remember. One of which is one of the scariest thing is, as Ibn al-Qayyim and others, they said, that كيف زالت عنك العصمة حال وقوعك في الذنب. That the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did, the protection was lifted from you when you committed the sin. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had protected the person while he is about to commit the sin, he would never commit the sin, but he was left. And that's the scariest thing. Because how can a person then guarantee that this will get even worse and worse? We are in need of the help of Allah and the protection from Allah. So the sin detaches the person, makes the person away. And a tawbah is return. Tawbah linguistically means to return. So to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's nothing more tuma'nina and tranquility and serenity and whatever you name it, is when a person returns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة. النفس المطمئنة is subject to be studied in the Quran. Al-Itminan is mentioned in the Quran. Verses as-Sakina. As-Sakina, they call it, it's وهبية وليست كسبية. As-Sakina, tranquility, it's given by Allah, not something that you earn. It's kind of a reward for a person. And there are means to it. Tranquility. And at-tuma'nina is different. At-tuma'nina oftentimes is used in the same meaning of as-sakina, but at-tuma'nina is tiqrarul ilmi fil qalb. When the knowledge becomes well established in the heart, and the person is in that state of tranquility at all times, when it comes to the truth and the deen and so on. So, and as actually is mentioned, Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah, he said, when النفس المطمئنة, as in Surah Al-Fajr, النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية, at the moment of death, it has that al-itmi'nan. At the moment of death, which is the most disturbing moment that if a person think of, but for the ones that have this tranquility in their hearts and their iman, تطمئن النفس إلى ربها. The soul becomes in state of tranquility to its Lord at the moment of death. فَتُحِبُّ لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ, then it loves to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that soul at the moment of death has the most feeling of serenity and tranquility, that it's pleased to meet its Lord. This is when the soul comes out. And this is the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, مَنْ أَحَبَّ لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ أَحَبَّ اللَّهُ لِقَاءَهُ. That whoever loves to meet Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would love to meet them. This is at the moment of death. As a result of what they have been doing in their life, with this al-istiqamah, and one of which is constantly returning to Allah, because everybody would return to Allah. So they would return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after the sin. ذكروا الله فاستغفروا لذنوبهم وَمَنْ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. And who forgives the sins other than Allah? Of course, no one. And that's how they believe. And because of that belief, as a hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive their sins. وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا. They were not persistent in the sin. وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ, while knowing. الإصرار كبيرة. To be persistent in a sin. No plans to repent from a sin, even if it's the smallest sin. This is a major sin. Because this israr is in the heart. And this knot of al-israr has to be undone. So the sin for the believers that commit sins, of course, they're not sinless, but their sins is without israr. Whenever they overpowered weakness, whatever, then immediately they return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with tawbah. But al-israr is something else. And the same thing with the sins with people together. A word, a gesture, People said something that a person doesn't like. We have all of these things have to be overlooked, and people have to purify and wash their hearts from any ill feelings towards one another, which is one of the characteristics of the believers. وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي قُلُوبِهِم مِّنْ غِلٍّ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would remove what's in the hearts from envy and anger and hatred and the like of this. So many different details, as it's mentioned, with the different types of oppressing oneself and wronging oneself and the different types of sins and the ahkam and the rulings, knowledge for the person to learn. And وَلَمْ يُصِرُّوا عَلَى مَا فَعَلُوا وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ. So then after that, but because of the time, he mentioned the list of the characteristics of the believers in Surah Al-Mu'minun. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. They are believers, they are they have khushu' in their salah because of this special moments that they have in the salah. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. They turn away from al-laghu, sins and nonsense and no benefit in whatever the people indulge in. And this is the effect of the salah. When a person have the khushu' in the salah, they don't waste their time in what others would waste their time in. And this is a big word that includes in it any laghu, anything that takes a person away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ. Those who give zakah. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ. They protect their private parts. إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ. Their amanat, the trust that they have been entrusted with, وَعَهْدِهِمْ, covenants, contracts. راعون. الرعاية is when you guard it, when you maintain it at all times. Even as simple as, which is not a simple thing, if you're working in a place, you have a contract, two parties, and you agreed to what's in the contract. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So the person has to fulfill this contract according to the intentions of the other side, not according to what you get a lawyer to get away with things, according to their intentions. How their intentions when they were sitting together and the business or whatever there is, it's according to their intentions. That's why al-ma'arid, or the sentences that can mean more than one thing, and a person would use that when they're dealing with contracts, it's not permissible. So if, al-ma'arid is when you say to someone, for example, you're selling a car that has a defect in it. So you would say the motor is perfect, but there's something else is not good. So you hide it, for example, right? And you would write all kinds of vague things, as is, and all of these types of things, right? But you know that there's some defect in it. They're not going to take you to court, maybe, right? But to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you cheated. You know there's something wrong with it, and you allowed yourself to sell it like this. And you have to expose every weakness in it. It's not going to be sold. The rizq is not in your hand. The rizq is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is clear. And the covenant between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we said سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا, this is the strongest of all covenants whatsoever. وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ وَمِيثَاقَهُ الَّذِي وَاثَقَكُمْ بِهِ إِذْ قُلْتُمْ سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. This is the mithaq to the entire ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Remember the favor of Allah upon you and his mithaq. Al-mithaq is the ahd with the heavy oaths that you took upon yourself when you said سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا. We listen and we obey. This is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. We listen and we obey. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Obedience. So then when there's disobedience, then a person is breaking this covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with the people, as the details of this to be observed. وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. Those who guard their salah, al-muhafadha, and to guard it and to make sure that this is something that is a continuous thing till a person departs from his life. And there's again a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ about the characteristics of the people of Jannah. ألا أدلكم على ما يمحو الله به الخطايا ويرفع به الدرجات. Actions that removes the sins and elevates the person, levels in Jannah. إسباغ الوضوء عن المكاره, to make perfect wudu when times of dislike, cold, tired. كثرة الخطأ المساجد, constant, lots of walking to the masajid and waiting for the salah after the salah. You pray Salatul Fajr, you wait for Salatul Dhuhr. And this is for those who are staying. And as you said, if you're mu'takif, mashallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. If you're not, try to stay in the masjid as much as you can until the end of Ramadan. And one of which is to wait for one salat to the other. And after Ramadan, if you have time, you pray Salatul Dhuhr and you wait till Salatul Asr. Maghrib, you wait till Salatul Isha with ibadah and dhikr and so on. the things to be when it comes to the tahara and the salah. There are so many hadith, of course, in this, and the 5 pillars of Islam, the 6 pillars of Iman, and many hadith that the Prophet ﷺ talks about the people of Jannah. One last hadith, even though that it's a part of a long hadith, which shows also the husn al-khuluq and the good manners. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ahlul Jannati thalatha. The people of Jannah are 3 types. ذو سلطان مقسط متصدق موفق. ذو sultan, someone of authority, he has power, and he's just, and he gives charity, he's generous. موفق, guided. Because usually the norm is the opposite. Because when someone has authority, that means يأمن العقوبة. He is safe from punishment because you have authority. So now the real iman comes out. If he's truly a believer versus someone that he would abuse the power. That's why never to wish for a position of leadership. And this is in our deen. And many people, they are like Fir'aun, but they're not given what Fir'aun is given. Right? They're not been tested like Fir'aun. So they would condemn Fir'aun. Fir'aun is such a bad thing and so on. But then once they're like Fir'aun, they become worse than Fir'aun. So a person is, the hearts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So this is the first one. وَرَجُلٌ رَحِيمٌ رَقِيقُ الْقَلْبِ لِكُلِّ ذِي قُرْبَى وَمُسْلِمٌ. And a man that is Rahim, merciful, رقيق القلب, his heart is very soft. لكل, towards every relative and Muslim, every relative and Muslim. He has this riqqa, this softness of his heart towards every relative and towards every Muslim. Not that he has the harshest heart towards every Muslim. This is negates the characteristics of the people of Jannah. We're not talking about the people of evil ones, but this is something that a person have to have, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said to every Muslim, and he's Rahim, he have mercy towards them. And this is part of the nasiha that a Muslim should have to others. So this is the second one. And then the third one, وعفيف متعفف ذو عيال. Afif, from al-iffa, part of it is an obligation to be chaste, to be away from haram. And it's used a lot for when it comes to relationship between men and women and the sins that get involved in this, and also in money. He's afif, that means he does not extend his hand to take something that is haram or shubha or doubt. He protects himself and his family from earning haram. And this criminal person, he's a criminal, the one that allow his family, those who depend on him, to eat haram. And he raised their flesh from haram. And he's responsible, and they have no one else but him. That's why some of the early generations of Islam, when he would leave to go to work, his wife would grab him from his collar like this. Tough sister, mashallah. So she would grab him and she would pull him like this. And she would say, Taqillaha fina. Right? Fear Allah in us. Do not bring haram, meaning to the home from his earnings. So, and of course, this is not for a woman to do that necessarily to her husband, but to remind him, yes. And she would not allow herself. So, afif, even if he's poor, it doesn't matter. This is, he take the means, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. متعفف على وزن متفاعل. That means the person he's going out of his way to make sure that he abstain from the haram. And as you said, there is no extremism when it comes to abstaining from the haram and the doubtful matters. It's not always goes by, is it haram? Is it haram? It doesn't have to be this way. If it's closer to the haram, if it's doubt, stay away from it. Be in the spaciousness of the halal. And the halal is spacious enough. So, and then ذو عيال. ذو عيال is, that means he has dependencies. العيال, children, wife and children. So he has lots of them. And he's concerned and worried how he's going to feed them. And this is by Allah. He's not feeding them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. One of the means of provisions in this life is to have children. And the Prophet ﷺ said, تنكحوا تناسلوا تكاثروا فإني مباهم بكم الأمم يوم القيامة. The people of ignorance will tell you, if you have more children, that means you'll be poorer. This is human ignorance. But from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're not the one that is providing for them. And when someone is born, his provisions is recorded. You take the means, this is a great ni'mah from Allah, as you see here. one of the people of Jannah. When someone is busy to make sure that he feeds his family from halal and he raised them to be upon the halal, and of course he's not undermining their rights. This is part of the people of Jannah. This is part of a long hadith because also talked about the people of the hellfire. So this is few examples, and otherwise the entire Quran, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to learn these treasures from the deen of Allah and to continuously be in that path of knowledge and to apply it in our life so that we become, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the people of Jannah. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.